Welcome to this week's podcast. I'm going to be introducing you to somebody who would absolutely transform most organizations she is part of. Used to be a consultant, HR consultant. Now she is a director in a company for HR that does an incredible amount for the companies that she works with. Jen is an expert at HR. There are very few people who can possibly change an industry or challenge paradigms in a business. Jen does this. Jen teaches leaders how to grow. She influences for change to create more efficiency in companies. She creates mentorship partners to get the most out of people. Let me ask you a question. What would it look like to work with an HR expert that doesn't simply follow regulations and no employee laws, but gets the most out of your team and trains them to help the company in ways you didn't even dream was possible? That's Jen. Now, again, she's not for hire, which is why I've got her on this interview so that she can share some of her wisdom with everyone else. Jen's not a paper pusher. She gave an incredibly important nugget or two about hiring and keeping the right people, even if they aren't ready for the future role or the role isn't ready for them, about 2/3 of the way through this interview. So listen up. This is going to be fantastic. I'll just throw out one other nugget here. There is a great little bit on why government organizations struggle so much with having great people. And if we want rock stars, we have to think and act differently than the organizations around us. Enjoy the interview. Welcome to another podcast where we're talking about human potential and getting the most out of ourselves and other people in our organization. I am really happy to introduce Jennifer Testawich to you guys today. Goes by Jen, and she's somebody who, even just in a few minutes spending time with her, just brought a big smile to my face, because we think about HR in really unique ways. And I think that we kind of pigeonhole it and put it in a box and don't allow HR to do everything it could do for our organizations. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I know that. So I'll back up a little bit. Jen, thank you so much for being part of this. Tell me more about Women Building Futures as well as your role with them.
Thanks, Mark. So Women Building Futures is a not-for-profit based in Edmonton, but expanding across the country now. And their main mission is economic security for women. But what that's leading to is changes in the workforce as far as diversity in the workforce. So they do everything from training. They have shops, welding shops, carpentry shops, all that kind of stuff, or they partner with other post-secondaries to get women into non-traditional workplaces. So, that as a side effect of that, because of course it gives economic security for them by going into those different kind of workplaces, but it's also creating diversity in the workplace because more and more women are going into those types of roles. So it's an awesome side effect of getting women into higher incomes.
Yeah, it sounds like it is something that allows women to explore all options rather than the few that are maybe easier pickings, right? It produces that, or it gives that opportunity to explore more fields.
Exactly. And a lot of times we're assisting women that are in tough situations to begin with. So it would be hard for them to get that first job in a trade where they've never really been in it. Maybe they've been working as a server or another type of service job that is, it's going to tap out at a pretty low salary. So it gets those women into other opportunities they probably wouldn't have jumped to otherwise.
It helps them for decades rather than the next week, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And then it's changing the workforce because we're trying to place women in companies that we approve. So they'll go through an employer of choice program. And so we can get these big construction companies on board with kind of changing the way they think about having women in the workforce. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, which really segues well into my next topic, which is you are, I want to put the right term to those. I was going to say shit disturber, but I don't think that that's the right term, right? Like you challenge organizations, you challenge the marketplace and say, how do we make something better? How do we bring value to the marketplace in different ways? Is that accurate? Would you see yourself that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really influential HR people or people who have a big impact are shit disturbers a what I tell a lot of CEOs that I work with. You might not like what I'm saying right now, but that's what you're paying me to be here for, to give some of that tough feedback sometimes. And I think that's what really effective HR people are able to do.
Excellent. So let's talk about one way you're stirring the pot. I want you to help paint a picture of how HR is so much more than hiring and regulations for a company.
So part of that is the tough feedback that I was just talking about. So being able to say to a director, that was probably the wrong move there. You engage in a conversation with one of your team members, and it has this effect where really you're trying to get a different outcome. So why don't you approach it this way instead? And a lot of times HR people don't have the authority to say, thou shalt do this. Instead, we have to influence. And so that can take some courage to be able to say to your CEO, because you still report into this company, right? You're still an employee there. But to be able to have those frank conversations around, maybe you should have managed this situation a little bit differently. And it is so much more than hiring and firing and writing policy. All of those are groundwork that has to be done. It's super important. But if you want to really be an HR person that influences change, first of all, you have to be sitting at that leadership table. So a lot of companies are still kind of old school that way, and they have them maybe at the manager level or even lower. They're just implementers that are assessing. But a company that sees HR important enough to be at that executive table, that's the kind of company I want to work for. I want to be sitting at that table so I can influence change at that level.
Okay, so let's go back to change at that level, because in our previous discussion, we talked about HR's role in developing and leadership. So maybe touch on that. What do you see HR's role in developing and leadership? Not just hiring, not just firing, not just managing problems, but how do you develop people and help them become great leaders in an organization?
A piece of that is always the formal training. So helping them get into wherever they may have a skill gap, getting that formal training. But I think that's only one piece. And by the time a lot of leaders are at that level, they've done that. They have all of their formal education and then some. So it's tricky when you're working with leaders that are super well educated, maybe an expert in their field, but we've promoted them out of success. So they were a rock star engineer, say, and we're going to put them in a leadership role. Well, part of HR's job is to make them successful in that leadership role. Part of that is making sure you put the right person in the right job. But let's say you got a good profile match, they've shown all of their skill leading up to that, but they haven't actually managed a team or a complicated team before. That's where I would come in. And it's things like mentoring from an HR perspective. How can I mentor you to do that? A lot of times if I know the whole scope of the leadership team, it's pairing up the right people. So, this might be I see a skill gap here, but you know what? This other executive is awesome at it. Let's pair up and create a mentoring relationship there. And it's also getting a little bit into the weeds with them and talking through an exact situation that happened. You have a poor performer on your team. How can I teach you to deal with that and help you develop the skills to have that? Because obviously I'm in HR and I strongly believe that if you can't be a good people leader, you're not going to be successful in your role, whatever the job is, because you need your team to be successful for you to be successful. So I'm always trying to coach and help them be a little bit better. And it doesn't mean that I'm an expert leader, right? I have some knowledge in that area and I think I can help. But a lot of times it's just that outside perspective and playing devil's advocate for those leaders. Well, what if we looked at it this way? What if we move forward in this way? And it helps them grow as a leader and sometimes take a breath, right? Like some stuff will happen and they're pissed off in the moment and they want to, maybe they want to jump in and terminate somebody or discipline somebody. And we have to be that voice of reason sometimes, like take a breath, let's sleep on it overnight.
Okay, there are so many things to unpack in what you just said. Some of this is leading back into what you said near the beginning, which is HR needs to take a step up and be at that leadership table, the decision-making group of human beings. The HR person needs to be there, right? So that's a really important part. What you're, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like you're saying this allows leaders to more focus on their role because you're taking away the extra stuff that they don't need to think about. They don't need to think about, okay, so this quarter, who do I need to pair up with and mentor a little bit more? How do I find this person? Because you already know everyone involved. You are an integral piece of everything, and you can handpick and say, hey, listen, you've got this skill set. We worked on this with you 5 years ago. Let's now develop this in a new person. You're excellent at this. This person is kind of feeling like fish out of water right now. Let's get them up to speed as quickly as possible. This is saving the company money. This is saving problems. This is becoming far more efficient. Is that basically what you're saying?
That is a big part of it. That you're talking about efficiency, so helping them be the most efficient leader they can, and we've put them in that role for a reason. But if they're getting pulled into a bunch of HR details, filling out forms, or getting approvals for things that could just be a simple email, like if we make things too cumbersome for them, then we don't have them focusing on the right things, and their success is our success. They have to be successful in the role. And also on that leadership piece, you don't got to figure it all out for yourself. You don't have to know it all yourself. A lot of time I spend with leaders is 15 minutes just talking, just giving them the opportunity to talk things through, get a couple nuggets of advice that they can take back, and not feel overwhelmed by having to create the wheel, or do I take, trying to think through every article I've ever read on managing this situation or this type of employee. They can rely on us for a lot of that expertise.
This is so important because I think some organizations really get this, and the ones that do flourish when they're making HR part of the process all along. But my sense, and I'm going to ask you because you've got more experience with this, my sense is that most organizations see HR as a paper pusher that gets in the way and is kind of like the police of, no, you can't do that. Oh, you got to do that this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And, I was giving this element a little bit of thought in the last few days. And there is a space for every type of HR. So there is a need to push that paper. Recruitments have to happen. Forms do have to get filled out. There is a need for that type of thing to happen. And there are different areas of HR. So if you're focused on training and development, maybe the skills you need in that might look a little different. The profile you put together might look a little bit different. But if you want to be an HR leader who affects change, which is the type of leader that I strive to be, you have to be at that leadership table and be looking at the whole scope of the organization. So there is a need for everybody, but if you really want to help managers be more efficient, you have to be a leader in HR. And there have been many times I'm the only, when I'm working for a small company, I might be the only HR person. So doing everything from pushing that paper to trying to guide the organization culturally or their leadership team. But I think that is the more important part. All that other stuff has to get done, but maybe it's because that's what I care about and I'm most passionate about. So obviously I think that's the most important part.
No, I think that this is a really important piece. Again, coming back to that paper pusher type idea, we think almost as a paper pusher as somebody who doesn't make decisions. They don't think, they just have to fill in the paperwork. And you know what? There is that position in every company. There's going to be a position where somebody just needs to do the dirty work, right? And some people thrive in that. The problem that I see is that the average person that thrives in that role cannot be a director of anything. Definitely not an HR director. And I think that that's something that we're kind of unearthing here, is saying, hey, listen, you need somebody in HR that can be a leader, that is of that mindset, that can fit into the role of saying, hey, listen, let's move things along here. Let's push things. Let's maybe push the boundaries or change the way things are happening so that we can be more efficient, or we can have just a better work environment in various ways. And it's not just about rules. It's not just about the hire, the fire. And yes, we are being more efficient, but we're also enjoying things more, and we are working far better as a team. Again, am I getting this right?
Yeah, 100%. 100% you're getting that right. And there's so many innovative and exciting things you can do if you get those details and that foundation stuff mastered. So all that kind of quote unquote paper pushing stuff is, you have that down solid, then you get into what I think of as the fun stuff, like the diversity, equity, inclusion realm. How do we develop that in our workplace and branch out into more areas around that? How do we make sure that our executive table is diverse and that we're pulling in all the right people and the right perspectives in order to move our organization forward? That's the fun stuff for me.
This is brilliant. You can tell I'm kind of taking notes as you're talking and thinking through things, because you're again bringing up so many subjects. I'm going to go back to something that you said and kind of bring it to light with what we were just saying about we need somebody in HR who isn't of the mindset of I'm just filling out the paper. We need somebody who is that I'm going to stir the pot. I'm going to make things happen in a way that helps the company, not working against, working within the leadership team with the same goals. You talked a little earlier about having somebody in the right role. You talked about maybe they're excellent at this. I think you said engineer or something like, but taking somebody who's excellent at something, and sometimes we promote them into a role where they're less likely to succeed because it is not the role for them. So maybe touch on that. How do you, from the HR perspective, help people fit the right role or find people for certain roles?
So the most challenging is when you have someone already in that role. So someone has already made the decision to put someone in that role, and you can see from the outside, the HR professional can see that it's not going to work. They need this type of person, this type of profile in that role if it's going to work. Mm. You don't have a ton of options. You can do all the training and that type of thing. That's great, and it'll help develop some skill, but people are who they are. So they're either going to change the role to morph it into something that suits their strengths, or they're going to select out. It doesn't mean you have to terminate somebody who's not the right fit. You can work really hard to make it fit if it works for the organization. It depends if it's actually going to benefit the organization. But I haven't had to actually terminate a lot of people for that. Instead, it's helping them find the right fit, ideally in the same company, and leaving the choice with them so they feel in control, feel in power of the decision. And sometimes it might be going back to being that engineer and not managing a team full of people. So helping them make those right decisions without them feeling like it's a failure. Like it doesn't mean moving up isn't success. Being successful in what you choose to do and what you're passionate about, that's success. It doesn't always mean climbing a ladder.
We see, generally speaking, in North America, we see moving up in a company as success. And so that's something that needs to shift as well, where we see, wait a second, if I'm phenomenal at this position, then actually moving up, and you talked about this, having a conversation with somebody, moving up is detrimental to the company, and I'm going to hate it too. And I've had that conversation with certain employees. We're like, do you truly want to manage? Because this is what it's going to look like. And all of a sudden they go, oh, no, that's not what I want. I'm like, okay, good. So let's figure out what works better for you right now. What are some ideas that you have on helping people in that position where somebody wants to be promoted and they're not a good fit? How do you have that conversation with somebody?
Part of it is what you just said, figuring out the why. What is your real motivator here? What attracts you to moving up? A lot of times it's money, right? It is, well, I'm going to make more if I get that other job. So addressing that, whatever the concern is, sometimes it's the prestige and the title. I've had people who do not care about a salary increase at all, but they want that title. So it's figuring out what is driving them to move up. And like you said, in North America, it's so much about moving up. The organization I'm with right now, we're trying to teach the organization or talk more about broadening jobs, giving more opportunity, being okay that sometimes developing people means they might leave. That's okay, because moving up might not be the right thing for them or the organization. It is that one-on-one, and I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. So when you're talking to people, we're building, sorry, let me go back for a second. We're building in the organization some knowledge around moving up doesn't always equate to success. So giving that base education, but then having those one-on-one conversations. You'll hear HR people always talk about performance appraisals. I could talk about that piece on its own for hours. But giving them the opportunity maybe it's in the performance appraisal process or somewhere else, to really talk about their actual goals and not what they think they need to say in order to get that promotion or be successful at this organization.
Some of what you're saying reminds me of a book that actually we talk a lot about at Concord, and that is First Break All the Rules, of saying, hey, it's about finding the right fit. It's not, let's change how we think. It's not about how do we teach somebody as much as possible and continue to push them up the ladder. It's how do we find the right fit for that person and then do everything we can to make sure they have every opportunity to be successful in the right fit. And that's just this running over and over and over as you're talking. I'm going, this is all based on such good research. So I appreciate that. Most challenging, again, finding the right role. I'm going to hammer on this a little bit because this is something that I hear all the time when I'm helping companies hire, when we're helping companies in strat planning, whatever it is. People are consistently saying, like, it's so hard to find the right role. And generally speaking, we're just basing this on resumes a lot of the time. And interior hires are often different. Now it's based on success in one role. So we push somebody up into a higher role. Again, you talked about, I think you said they have to have the right, I can't remember exactly what you said, but what came to me was personality. They have to be the right fit. So maybe fill that out a bit for me. What do you do? What are the tools you use? How do you find the right fit for somebody, the right role and the right fit for that role?
So during the recruitment process, you're right, so much is on the resume and then the interview. Resume, of course, is super important, but especially in this day and age, anybody can generate a great-looking resume. My 18-year-old who's had one job has the most beautiful resume, but it isn't everything, right? So HR professionals we're pretty good at reading through the prettiness and getting to the heart of it, but it's only one thing. So you figure out, okay, they have the base skill or education level or experience that we were looking for. Let's bring them in for an interview. You bring them in for that interview and you have an hour with them. Same problem though. Some people can show up amazingly in that interview. Do you actually need that skill in the job? Right? So we don't always think about that. Just because it's usually the people that are super outgoing and talkative and friendly. Oh, they interview beautifully. You don't need that in a data analyst job, though. It doesn't mean they're going to be a data analyst expert. It's a great skill you might want to look for if it's a salesperson. So you are looking for that in the interview, and you do get some good reads on it. But the next step we take is using the traits profile tool. We use it. Every company uses it a little bit differently. We pick our top maybe 15 people, candidates, and send that out to them. So the ones that have a good resume and are aligned or really closely aligned with our profile, those top 3 are who we bring in the interview. If we stick to that process, we have a lot of success. The trick always is with using any types of tools is managers will then say, no, I really like this person better. I don't care that they don't fit the profile. I'm going to hire them. And, especially in the beginning, when you bring a new tool into a company, you have to let some of those things happen and then try not to say, I told you so at the end, but that does feel a little nice sometimes, but they have to see the success of it. I have a different company I was working with. We had brought in this tool and it took us a while to get the model right because you create a model for the job. And it took us a little bit to get the model right. once we got that model right, and it was for a position we hired the most of in the organization. That was the operations people that did the bulk of the work. Since we got that model bang on, and they have that background that we wanted, all success. Like, I tell this story all the time because it is a perfect example of getting those things to align beautifully. A really smart interview process that we use, a good background, and the profile alignment, we end up with rock stars in those roles. So I just tell new companies, work through it. It'll be worth it once you get it mastered.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's with the new hire. Now, hiring within the company. Now, again, what are the tools you use? What is the process you personally use to make an internal hire to make sure it's a good fit?
It is trickier for sure, because you want to keep that person motivated regardless of what the outcome is going to be. And you want to keep them engaged, and likely they're applying because they're good at their job. So we don't want to lose that employee. We want to keep them high functioning. So we look at a few things. We look at how they're performing in their existing job. We're not even going to consider them if they're not doing well in their existing job. So we'll just assume that they are. We look at their profile compared to the role. And sometimes in those cases, I'm looking for, okay, how much does this deviation actually matter? So if it's a leadership role and their assertiveness is a -2, and I know they're going to be managing a tough team, it's never going to work. No matter how much I will want to give this person the opportunity, I wouldn't be setting them up to be successful. So it's not the end-all be-all, I tell people, with any tool that you're using, but listen to what it's saying and see if any compromises you're going to make, is it actually worth it? Part of what's really tricky with internals, and I have this myself, is I have a really strong leadership profile. And you still got to start somewhere. I'm not going to start in a leadership role. And so that can be challenging when I'm hiring or have a newer person. Well, they still got to make their way through, right? You can't start as a leader. So the profile can work both ways, right?
Okay, so I just came up with a question that has been interesting for me for a while, and this is the perfect time to ask it of somebody who can ask it. How much, and I don't know if I'm going to word this correctly, so you fill in the blanks. I'm sure you're going to understand what I'm saying. How often do you hire somebody with the thoughts of this person is going to be a phenomenal leader? We don't need them to be the leader right now, but we're going to need them to be a leader in 6 months or a year and a half. So almost like succession planning within roles or directorship or whatever. How much time and effort do you put into that? Is there any kind of secret sauce to figuring out how to do that well?
I think that there is a bit of a secret sauce. So if it is an external hire and they have that type of profile, they're not going into a leadership role right off the bat, I'm thinking about how long until they will. Because if we're talking 3 years out, they're not going to be there that long. They're going to get frustrated because they don't have the ability to use what their greatest talents are. But if it can be a clear succession plan, we can say, we know this person is working their way out. We're identifying you as a possible successor to that role. That's going to keep them engaged and excited because they can see a path to leadership. So an external hire, that would be my approach. Internally, if we have someone already internally with a leadership profile, great, depending how long they think it's going to take them to get there. I've seen examples of people who really fail at those entry-level roles because they get so frustrated, and then they damage relationships and do all of these tough things. So it is tricky when you put them in a role or have an internal in a role with a really strong leadership profile. You better figure out a way to let them use that in their job, because they're not going to be happy. And if promotion's not on the table right now, don't have the ability, don't have the job, or they have different skill gaps, you better find a way to let them lead something, let them own things, let them have some autonomy in their role. You better figure out a way if you want to keep them, because they won't stay. Instead, what they'll do is job hop their way up, which isn't horrible. Lots of people do that as a way to advance their career, but it's not. It might be best for them. That's probably not best for the organization.
Yeah, so this really hits home, Jen. I'm going to tell a really quick story. So my background's psychology. I was working with as a psychologist for the Alberta government, and it's unionized. I was working towards a position and kept applying to it and kept interviewing. And the feedback I was getting as I was going through the interviews is, you couldn't have changed anything in the interview. I would come out and say, what could I change? I didn't get the position. What could I change? They said, you couldn't change anything. This person has seniority. And what they described was, if somebody has seniority, they have to score a certain percentage less than me to actually lose to me. And so that's exactly what happened with me. I'm a leadership personality. I started getting frustrated. I actually started giving up on interviews to try, because you had people coming in for short periods of time that were just getting a position to try to get something else. I would have stuck around for a while because I loved what I was doing. And so I started stirring the pot. I wanted to see change. So I was this low-level position, frustrating the mid-managers because I was pushing things and they were going, Mark, we can't change. We can't, like, what are you talking about? So I was actually kind of, when I look back at it, I was kind of poisonous for that organization. Not because I was trying to be a problem, not because I was trying to cause grief, because I wanted so much more for everything around me. I was getting frustrated because I started going, wait a second, there isn't going to be any more movement. And this wasn't over like a long period of time. This is only like probably over 12 to 15 months for me. But that frustration led to kind of a rough break where I was really frustrated, and the team was frustrated with me, going like, Mark, just do your job. And I was going, there's so much more we could be doing here. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think we're going to see more and more of that happening, because the younger generations, the Gen Z coming in, they're not going to put up with that. So the whole idea of it is what it is and the process is what it is and there's no flexibility there, they're not going to tolerate that the same way as, a boomer generation who, felt like, okay, I have to put my time in, I have to be patient, even if maybe that wasn't their personality. It was something they accepted as a generation, as part of working through your career. Well, this new generation is not going to put up with that. So employers are going to have to figure out a way, and it's tougher in an environment like you're talking, where there's a collective agreement in place, the rules are what they are. Even to change them is a long, cumbersome process. It's not going to get you the most creative and innovative people moving up the ladder, right? You're making decisions for the wrong reasons and moving people for the wrong reasons. So I think, not always, but in a lot of cases, you end up with a lot of average versus rock stars. You have that a little more flexibility in your organization and the courage to maybe tell that more senior person, you know what, I have another candidate, even though they're more junior than you. I'm sorry, but I have to make that decision. And having the courage to do that, because it stirs things up and it can create some hurt feelings. But if you know in your heart and, you have a logical reason for the decision that is best for the business, one of those two people is going to be disappointed. So let's make the decision that it is going to be the best for the business and the individual is going to be set up to be successful.
Yes. And really, that's a very simple rubric to use to make decisions, right? I mean, it's always more complicated than that. But basically, we're going, man, if I could have the last 2 minutes of what you just said and just play it from loudspeakers to organizations constantly, it would help so many people. I'm looking at the time, Jen, and I'm going, I want to talk to you for another 3 hours on this stuff, because not only is it interesting for me, but I know that it is extremely valuable to organizations all over the place, because I'm seeing problems in organizations all over the place that this would help solve. If you're okay with it, I'm gonna ask for a commitment while we're recording this, that you will come on for another conversation with me and talk about performance appraisals. Would you be willing to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I could talk about all this stuff for another 3 hours easily. So I'm back whenever you want me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Before we take off here, please, is there any information, contact information, places that you would recommend people going that help you and what you're striving to do? Anything that you can throw out there, any accounts that you can put out? I want to make sure that you have an ability to promote yourself and your organization as well.
thank you very much for that. And, a couple of years ago when I was consulting, I would have grabbed at that for sure. But in lieu of that, I will say, look for WBF, look for Women Building Futures. There's, the things that employers can do. So if you're an HR person in a different company, look at WBF, hire some of our grads, get into the Employer of Choice program. There's lots of great things that WBF does that can help most organizations. So that would be my plug, my push.
Perfect. Now, I'll put this in the show notes as well, but where should somebody go if they want to just start understanding what WBF does?
Website for sure. So just Google Women Building Futures. I think it's womenbuildingfutures.com. Start on the website, which has recently been revamped and is still going through a lot of fun stuff. But yeah, start there.
Brilliant. And again, we will put this in the show notes. Jen, thank you so much. This is a good gift.
Great. Thank you very much. I had fun.
Jen is incredible, isn't she? It was so much fun to do that interview. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I've got a few thoughts here. So typically this outro, this back part after the interview, I'm going to be giving research or information to you. I'm going to do things a little bit differently this week in that I am going to offer a recommendation for a book, which I mentioned during the podcast, but I want to break that down a little bit more and give a few final thoughts on that interview. So number one, how do you put the right person in the right job? We have an obsession with promotions rather than fit in our culture. So many people are after that title, not even because they necessarily want it, but because that's what they're told they should be focusing on. It's how we see ourselves. Now, here's the book that I'm going to recommend. It's called First, Break All the Rules. It's by Marcus Buckingham, and it is a book on management, really strong management. Here is where I will talk about the link between what Jen said, what we are doing at Concord with traits, the traits tool, as well as this book by Marcus Buckingham, First, Break All the Rules. The connection here is that, again, fit between person or employee and role is more important than anything else. If we get the fit right, everything else will fall into place. Success is so much more than promotion. And in First Break All the Rules, the book that I just mentioned, Marcus Buckingham talks about how really unique companies, this is happening more and more right now, there are some really innovative companies that instead of having every promotion as a pay increase, what they've done is they've created different bands. So, for example, if somebody is in sales, they could be earning more and more money as they move up in this band. Having said that, if they move to manager, they would actually take a pay cut. If they managed other sales staff, they would take a pay cut. Now, they could also grow that band, and they could grow in their ability to make money in that role. But if they then moved to a director role, and they were the top of the management pay band or pay scale, they would now move down to a lower pay grade at the bottom of the director pay scale, and they could move up again. What this does, and it's an incredible idea. What this does is it allows people that time to think, do I truly want this? Is this part of my career path, or is it just a title? Do I want to take a pay cut for the title? Now, some people will, but it allows organizations to think differently. Now, again, if you know sales, sales, you can often make way more than you're making in many other roles in a company. Might have been a poor example, but that's an example of how we can change how our employees think about things, change the culture of an organization, and make them so much stronger. Another thing that Jen mentioned is that sometimes it isn't about staying in the company. Sometimes it's about moving to a new company. If the role doesn't exist, and it's going to take too long for that role to exist for an employee that could be a rock star, it is okay to say goodbye to people. It's okay to find a great fit for them somewhere else. And you know what? If things end well, who knows? There's always the potential to work with that person in the future. The relationship is intact. Another really quick idea that came across in this interview with Jen was something objective that can be helpful to get past a great resume and great interview. Again, I talk about this all the time with traits, but great interviews are typically the wrong person for many jobs. And Jen, I think, mentioned data analyst. If you have a data analyst and they're not going to be a director, they're not going to be a leader, you simply want them to crunch numbers. That person is most likely not going to be the best interview you've ever had, the most enjoyable, I should say, interview that you've ever had. They're not going to necessarily be the most gregarious personality. That is okay. That is not only okay, it is good. It is excellent. So we need to break out of this mindset that a great resume and a great interview create a great employee. That is not what creates a great employee. Again, personality creates the great employee. So again, Jen said that she uses the traits tool at the end, after the interview, after the resume. We typically start with it. Either way, it provides something objective. And listen, traits, again, I've said this before, traits is not the be-all, end-all. It does not supplant everything else that you need to do for your company. But it is an objective tool that can be used to give this other check, which is exactly the way Jen uses it. She uses that tool to see, hey, these last 3 people, these finalists for the job, what is traits saying about them? Sometimes it just gets to the core of something and you realize, oh, I might have made a really big mistake here, or I'm dead on. I'm doing everything right. Last point before I leave you this week was something that Jen talked about. She said that great leadership requires asking the right questions. And again, repeat that. Great leadership requires asking the right questions. I agree with this completely. Actually, I agree with this in most roles. If we want to learn, if we want to grow, if we want to get more, if we want to become more efficient, we need to ask questions. We need to practice curiosity rather than judgment, rather than saying, this happened, therefore this person is this way, or whatever, this group of people. We get into trouble all over the place with society in this way. Great leadership requires asking the right questions. So what are those right questions? That's what I'm going to leave you with this week. Think about the question that I'm asking here. What are the right questions to ask that allows you to become a greater leader? Enjoy your week. I'm looking forward to the next interview.